I'm gonna give you a chance to answer some of these things for yourself to see how you think about things, what kind of things you can learn about yourself from these. So the first one is estimation and perception. And these are the classics. So if you've read anything from Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow, or Predictably Irrational, or anything from behavioral economics, they should be very familiar to you. So here is the first question for you. And just try and make an estimation. So this is my scenario, the best student in my MBA class in Hong Kong. Okay? So think about what an MBA class in Hong Kong looks like. Used to write poetry and is rather shy and small in size. So try your best to estimate which one of those. What was the student's undergraduate major? So we're talking about a master's in business administration. So we're talking about the student who wrote poetry, rather shy and small in size, and you need to guess what this person's undergraduate studies were. So the first option A is Chinese studies. Second option is economics, right? So think about this for a while. How would you make this kind of assessment? How would you approach this kind of thing? Right? So you have an image in mind, right? So if you don't mind, by show of hands, how many of you would say A? Raise your hand. Yeah? About half of you. B? Okay, almost the second half. Okay, very good. Thanks for participating. This is great. So actually, if you think about this, the way that we approach this, if we try to estimate reality, is that we try to think about the probabilities of what is the likelihood of this to exist in reality. And if you think about an MBA class, a master's in business administration, who goes to an MBA class? And then you look at the probabilities of what is the probability that somebody goes to Chinese studies, or what is the probability that somebody goes to economics. Even though this is Hong Kong, Chinese studies are far lower in terms of the number of people attending compared to economics, which is very, very substantial in Hong Kong, right? So if you just look at the probabilities, the base probabilities, the probability of economics is a lot higher than the probability of Chinese studies. And then, in addition to this, when we're talking about an MBA, it's a lot more likely that somebody who did an undergraduate in economics is going to go for an MBA compared to somebody who did Chinese studies. Does this make sense? Right. However, what did they do in this scenario? What did Kahneman and Tversky did here? They did all kinds of fillers. They gave you something writes poetry in order to trigger some kind of a stereotype, or rather shy and small in size. What does this actually tell you about this person? Not much. This is irrelevant information. We need to ignore this information because we have a lot more substantial information available to us. How many people study economics? How many people study Chinese studies? How many people that study either one of those proceeds to an MBA? So most of the people, usually when I give this in a classroom to people who don't know anything about judgment decision making, and I ask them, most of them follow the stereotype. Writes poetry sounds like more of humanities, something more like Chinese studies, right? So here is a question. In one single question, we were able to fool you, direct you, bias you into one direction, when actually when you look at the available information in full, without any bias, the other option is more likely, okay? So this is already to give you the power of single questions. Actually, you can do a lot with just one question to learn something about your intuitions, the way that you process information. Here's another one, a classic. So try and rank and estimate the following causes of death in the United States in the years 1990 to 2000. Rank them from 1 to 5, and then if the total population is 300 million back then, today it's a little bit higher, 350, but 300 million, just try and in your mind rank them which one is the highest, and then try to give some kind of a number. Out of the 300 million, how many people are killed, the cause of death within a decade, so 1990s to 2000. Now, if you live here in Romania and you're not really exposed to what's happening in the United States, then you need to make some estimations and use your intuitions. What does your intuition tell you about all of this? Right? So I'll give you a second, think about this. So we have tobacco, we have poor diet, we have motor vehicle accidents, we have firearms, and we have illicit drug use. Now, if you understood the concept of the first question, you're already thinking, he is going to trick us. Something here is going to fool us in order to go in one direction when actually the answer is in a different direction. And if you're thinking that, then you're already grasping something about the psychology of single questions. So what's happening here? What am I trying to do here? So actually, in terms of real data, the ranking here between all of those is exactly in the order that this is happening here. So tobacco is the #1 killer in the 1990s, followed by poor diet. And these are by far bigger killers than all the rest. Motor vehicle accidents, firearms, illicit drug use. A lot bigger than the first two, a lot bigger than the last three. But what do most people answer intuitively? If this is the first time that they see this and they didn't answer the first question about Chinese studies versus economics, they see this and they say, let me think what I remember from the news. What do I remember from the news the most? I remember terrorism. I remember all kinds of shootings in schools. I remember a big drug problem in the US. I remember all of these things. These are the first things that come to mind. Ease of recall. It's much easier for me to recall things about firearms and illicit drug use and motor vehicle accidents in the US than all the other stuff. We just don't hear headlines that talk about tobacco or poor diet and physical health. But these are the actual stats from the 1990s to the 2000. So you can see the tobacco is about 500,000, poor diet 400,000, and the other ones don't even arrive at the same scope, right? So here's another single question that gets you to understand something about yourself. The ease of recall, how easy it is for you to recall all kinds of things that you read in the media, social media or traditional media, from all the instances of all the things that you've processed, is already influencing you in a certain direction. When we look at the real data, where is this coming from? Why is this happening? It's very, very small, so I'm just going to tell you what each column means. The one on the left is the actual causes of death. What you can see from actual causes of death in the US is that actual causes of death is the heart disease, cancer, and then after these are 50%, then come road incidents, and then come Alzheimer's, and then comes a stroke and all of that. What do people report about in the media? What do people read about in the media and social media? This is what they read about. They read about homicide, they read about terrorism, they read about suicide. Terrorism is about 35%. How much is it in reality? It's here somewhere. It's less than 1%. And you can get all of that from a single question. So we just posed, please rank the causes of death. Is this clear? Okay, very good. Which leads me to a new domain. And this is a very, very important domain because this is something that we should know a lot about. Facts about the world. So I'm trying to get you to estimate things about the United States. And maybe United States because it's the big empire controlling a lot of things in the world and influences all of us. And all of us watch, I don't know, Friends and Seinfeld and all of us on Netflix. The big companies are there. But the question is generally about the world. When we estimate things about the world, what is our capacity to really know what's happening in the world? And we just 2 or 3 years ago came out of a pandemic. Now there's all kinds of places in the world where there are wars. There's a little bit of chaos. We're just talking about what's happening with democracies and human rights. So it just seems like we're consistently in a crisis and that things are getting worse all the time, especially when it comes to reading the newspapers. It seems like when we open the newspapers, we see a lot of bad things happening. The question is, does this reflect what's happening in the world? I ask my students in some of the courses, I ask them, if you could choose to be born at any point in time in the past, when would you choose to be born? And people have this nostalgic sense of saying, oh, I would rather be born at the beginning of the 20th century because then that's when things were great. Were they great? We didn't understand anything about germs, illnesses. The toilets were just running as sewers in the street. A lot of things back then that we don't think about. We still think about the Hollywood representation, what happened at the beginning of the 20th century. But whenever we go back in the world, in time, then we see that some things were missing that we have today, but we didn't have back then. So if you look at the progress of mankind, actually, when we look at the fact, it seems like the best time to be born in the history of mankind is today. It's now. This is the best time. But it doesn't feel like this, because when we open the newspapers and we look at the media, it seems like everything is collapsing, everything is crashing, and all of us are facing lots of challenges. So here are some questions that I pose to my students, and these are not my questions, these are from Gapminder. Gapminder was formed by a person called Hans Rosling, who was a doctor, and he was in charge of the Swedish education of medicine. He was informing the Nobel Prize committee and the people who are in charge of the Swedish health system in order to try and inform them, try to help them to understand what kind of medical policy making to do, what kind of decisions to make. And he realized that when he was posing these kinds of questions, single questions, to both his students and Nobel laureates and people who are educated and people who understand medicine in Sweden, many people got things wrong. So here's the question here from the Gapminder. This is the link. This is number 7. How did the number of deaths per year from natural disaster change over the last 100 years? More than doubled, remained about the same, decreased to less than half. When I show this to my students, we do this on Mentimeter and they vote, and there's a little bit of a competition of who gets this right. So you can think about what your estimation is here. How about this? Worldwide, 30-year-old men have spent 10 years in school, on average. How many years have women of the same age spent in school? So if you're very pessimistic, you would say something like 3 years, maybe 6 years. If you're a little bit more optimistic, 9 years. All of this is not 10 years, so it's not completely equal. But based on your estimation or understanding of the world, come to some conclusion of what you think you will answer here. How about this? In 1996, tigers, giant pandas, and black rhinos were all listed as endangered. How many of these 3 species are more critically endangered today? 2 of them, 1 of them, none of them. Okay? So already from my opening, you can sense where is it that I'm going with this, right? Because when I pose this to my students, most of them think that the world is getting worse. So when it comes to this, they think either remain about the same or more than that, because we have climate change, because things are very, very bad and there's storms everywhere and people are getting killed. But actually, in reality, it's about less than half. So we are much better at dealing with natural disasters than we used to be. It used to be that when you had a natural disaster, that's it, you're gone. You're gone, your village is gone, the entire valley is gone. Nowadays, we have ways to fight these things and we're getting better at them, even in the global south, even in developing countries. How about this? We're making progress. So if you see the education of women over time, it's getting more and more equal. So now we're getting very close. So the right answer is 9 years. Okay? How about this one? Which one is more endangered today? None of them. Actually, we've become very, very good at protecting these 3. We're not good at protecting all animals. We're just very good at protecting these 3. So there's still a way to go. There's some animals that we should be pessimistic about and do a better job. But at least when it comes to that, we used to think that these animals are going to disappear, but now they're doing quite well and flourishing wherever we're protecting them. Okay? So why am I showing you this? Here is from Gapminder. This is what they're trying to show. This is the rate of what people are answering. And they give a slightly different type of question than what I'm giving you. So they give like 3 different options. And they give something like 13 different questions. Then the question is, how many of them do people from around the world get correctly? So here you can see this question about 10 years in school on average, how many for women? The correct answer is 9. You can see that in Hungary, 32% get it right, the US 26, Norway, Finland, Spain is about 8, 10, and 13. And Hans Rosling is saying that something very, very curious is happening, because he added this line, this little monkey here, and he's saying, if you're a monkey, and I'm just giving you bananas based on how, whether you answered something correctly or not, monkeys get this right 33% of the time. So the Hungarians and the South Koreans are on par with the monkeys, but it seems like all of these are much less than the monkeys. So this does not reflect, some kind of randomness. This reflects a strong bias that comes from somewhere to answer the wrong answer. The question is, why is this happening? And we can get all that information that people are answering this incorrectly from a single question. something like this, a fact about the world. Why is this happening? First, we'll see some statistics. Actually, when it comes to all kinds of things around the world, we can see big improvements in the world today. So our World in Data is an amazing website that visualizes things for you to try and show you the kind of progress that we're making. So if you go on this website, you can see extreme poverty used to be, if we were living at the beginning of the 20th century, definitely if we go even further back, most of us would be farmers, most of us would work all day, most of us will pay big taxes to the wealthy people on top, the kings and queens, right? So poverty, extreme poverty around the world has declined. And we're getting to a point where it's really a possibility that we'll be able to get rid of poverty if we keep at the current rate. In addition, basic education is rising, literacy is rising, child mortality. If you were living back in the beginning of the 20th century, most chances are that you would die as a baby. You get born and then you die. Nowadays, it's very, very rare for a child to die, mortality after birth. So child mortality is getting very, very close to zero. Vaccination is going up. Democracy is still struggling, but even if we compare democracy to what was happening 100 years ago, there's no way to compare this because democracy is really on a rise. So the trend, the overall trend, seems to be a positive trend. So if you go on Gapminder, they do a very, very good job at showing you statistics from all over the world based on single questions, showing you how you're wrong about the world, about many, many things. And there's no reason for us to be wrong about the world because we have access to information. Now we have all these AIs, right? We are able to ask a question and get information. So why is it that we get these things wrong? Gapminder is trying to help people by providing them with very good tools. So I show my students some of these tools and how to use these tools. So next time somebody asks you this kind of single question, that you'll have some answers, good answers based on real data. If you want to know more about Hans Rosling, he calls this whole thing factfulness. Instead of being based on your intuitions, on your false beliefs, on your ease of recall, on your representation in your mind regarding certain facts, just go and look up decent sources of information. So 10 reasons we're wrong about the world and why things are better than you think. There are some good reasons for optimism, but we need to know what the facts are. In addition, Steven Pinker, one of our greatest thinkers in psychology, definitely, I think just came out another book about the way that we think about what other people think. So he is a great thinker, and he is also the case for reason, science, humanism, and progress, saying we get the world wrong, and there's a good reason why we get it wrong. There's so many powerful forces that bias us. So here are a list of heuristics and biases, all kinds of things that the Gapminder is trying to educate us about. I'll just touch on one of those. Bad is stronger than good. We just remember bad things a lot more than we remember good things. Yesterday, I got the evaluations from the University of Hong Kong for the last course that I just gave. The evaluations in terms of averages were on par or better than the department, on par or better than what I did before. However, there were 2 angry students. And these angry students really drilled down in what they identified as my weak points and the things that they know that I care about. They call me and say, "You think you're altruistic? You did not help us." And of course, the whole night yesterday, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, these poor students, what did I do to them? And they were talking about, their mental health and all that. And forever, the only thing I will remember from this course are these 2 upset students. It doesn't matter how many good comments are in there. I'll remember these bad things much more than the good things. And it happens a lot, when we have relationships, one bad fight can really affect the way that we perceive the entire relationship. When we see good news, we can see a lot of good news every day for a month. One bad news overcomes all of that, and suddenly we're pessimistic, right? So bad is stronger than good. We've done many kind of experiments on this. We see this again and again. So this is something to look out for. How is this impacting us on the daily basis? So you can see over here, negativity drives online news consumption. So now when we live by the click, the news media knows that in order to get you engaged, in order to get you staying on the platforms, in order to get you to care, to do something, to stay more, to become angry, to comment on other people. They need to get you upset. And there's lots of good evidence that we have from psychology that media knows, social platforms know how to exploit you, and the bad is stronger than good, in order to drive you to not see the world the way that it is, to not go to Gapminder, to stay in your social circles and stay in your endless loops of bad news. Right? I'm going to move on to statistical intuitions. So we've touched on something very, very broad, facts about the world. You know, what do we perceive about the world? Now is about statistics. I know you don't like statistics. I don't like statistics either, but I'm going to present you with a statistical question. I apologize. This is Daniel Kahneman, the only psychologist to ever win the Nobel Prize. If he were alive, then Amos Tversky, who was his partner in his articles, would have received the Nobel Prize with him. Because of the Nobel Prize in 2002, Daniel Kahneman was pushed to produce a book, Thinking Fast and Slow. And until now, even though this is a very dry reading, it's very difficult to go through the entire book. It's become very, very popular, and until now, it's a bestseller. You'll go into a bookshop and you'll very likely see Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow there. Actually, this is the first research that Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky ever did together. So they presented this kind of question to you, and I'm going to read this out to you. Suppose that you ran an experiment with 20 subjects and you obtain a significant result which confirms your theory. So already there's some boring words in here. Significant, what does that mean? What is this Z? What is this p-value, two-tailed? We're already yawning and wanting to go to sleep. We'll ignore this for now, but the thing that we need to remember here is that we ran 20 participants and we found support for a hypothesis. So this is already great. We can publish this somewhere, right? P-value lower than 0.05. Now, imagine that you do a replication. You run an additional group of 10 subjects. What do you think the probability is that the results will be significant by a one-tailed test separately for this group? So the general question is, it worked for 20 participants, you find support for your hypothesis. How likely is it that you're going to find support for the hypothesis in another group of 10? I don't know what they teach you in terms of all the topics regarding open science and replication crisis, but a lot of things have been happening in psychology and other sciences in the last 15 years. This is a lot before that. This is 1971. Who did they present this to? They went to statistician conferences and psychologist conferences. So these are experts in statistics. These are the people who write your statistics books. And they gave them this question, wanting to know what their estimation is. What did they find out? This is what they showed. So you can see this is Amos Tversky, Daniel Kahneman. This is cited by the thousands. This is the earliest work that they've done in 1971. If you feel the probability is somewhere around 0.85, you may be pleased to know that you belong to a majority group. Indeed, that was the median answer. Where we got this from is Mathematical Psychology Group and the American Psychological Association. However, the majority is wrong. The probability is a lot lower than that. If we take into consideration all the things that you may have heard about in terms of the open science replication, the probability is even lower than that. But what does it mean that Kahneman and Tversky were able to show that even statisticians and psychology experts get this kind of question wrong? It's horrible because when we read articles, we go directly, we want to see support, no support. We want to see the p-value. Oh, p-value lower than 0.05. Now I should do a TED Talk on this. Now I should present this in class. Now I should build my thesis on this. But many times, people don't take a moment to try and understand what do these statistics actually mean. Why is this important? Why is this cited 5,000 times? What can we learn from this? Only a single question. So we're wrong about statistical intuitions as well. Implications for science. And I'm going to show you here how this has implications for the way that we do hiring or funding in universities. And this is something that I've seen in all of the different universities that I've attended in terms of the way that we recruit other professors. So I'm going to ask you a very simple question. Assume that you are here in the University of Bucharest and you need to hire a new professor, a new faculty. And you have two candidates. Now, these candidates are very, very similar in every possible way. What's similar about them? They both had the same kind of resources during the PhD, so both of them had a participant pool of about 2,000 participants. Both of them did something of a hypothesis that are 50% correct. And then, even if you don't know what an effect size is, then the effect size is a very typical one. So 0.5, let's say, is a typical one, whatever that means. The thing that you need to remember is that both of them had exactly the same starting position when it comes to number of participants and the kind of designs that they do. Now, after 5 years, both of them come to the department, University of Bucharest, and they say, we want to work here. So you look at their CVs. One of them, candidate A, published 33 statistically significant papers, p-value lower than 0.05. Candidate B published 21 statistically significant papers. And now, by show of hands, who of you is going to hire candidate A? Raise your hand. You're hesitating because you know there's a trap here, but you can't tell what the trap is, right? Because the only thing that we are used to compare people on, how many publications do they have? 33 publications, higher, immediately, much better than 21. But because you know me already and we've answered a few questions, you know that there's a trick. What is the trick and how is this related to Kahneman and Tversky? What was the problem in Kahneman and Tversky in that scenario? P-value is okay, we care about p-value. What is the other thing that we care about, which is very problematic? A sample of 20, right? Sample of 20, it means there's very, very wide variation, very big noise, right? So this can go any kind of different ways. And actually people tend to infer from very, very small samples and say, oh, it's been published based on a sample from Princeton in the 1970s, therefore it applies to all humankind for eternity. Does it? Have anybody tried to replicate this? When they replicated this, did they find support for this? Did they replicate this with 10 or did they replicate this with 10,000? Did they replicate this with the same students? Did they replicate this around the world, right? So what's missing here? What's the thing that we're not looking at? What is this single question trying to bias you towards? So I ran this, I was very active on Twitter X before the evil company became under Elon Musk, changed all kind of things. But you can see I used to do a lot of these kind of surveys. You can see like 350 votes. And then I asked people, for example, if two candidates are exactly the same, one is from an Ivy League university and one is from non-Ivy League, who are you going to hire? And people are saying, we're going to hire the Ivy League candidate. I'm like, this doesn't make any sense because they're exactly the same in every possible way. The Ivy League had it very, very easy. But just imagine you're coming from University of Hong Kong, University of Bucharest. In order to get to the same performance as the Ivy League guy, we needed to work a lot more in order to beat the odds. Why would you go for the one who had it easy and just went along with things and not the person who actually beat the odds and transformed himself in order to achieve the same as Ivy League, right? So this reflects a bias. And then, of course, in terms of grants, also presents a bias. So I keep asking people this kind of thing. So what's hidden behind this? Because they had the same resources, actually, when they distribute these resources in order to get the 33 statistically significant papers, their N, the sample size, was a lot lower. Because they have the same resources. In order to get to 33 statistically significant papers, they need to use a lot lower N. N is 25 here, N is 100 here. Why does this matter? Why do I care about this? Because power is very, very important for the chances of replication, for the chances of this being a solid finding. So here you can see, candidate A, 15% is a false positive, 25% that this is going to be replicated. How about candidate B? Because they invested more, N equals 100, then only 6 from 15 to 6 is a false positive and the replicability rate is a lot higher. Who am I going to hire? The person who invested what is needed in order to get reliable, credible, solid results. But what do we focus on? We focus on how many publications. We don't even open the publications in order to see what's inside, right? So we're very bad at statistical intuitions. So knowing about the problem helps protect against the problem, right? In Thinking Fast and Slow, there's actually a chapter. And the chapter is called The Marvel of Priming. And here is what Kahneman wrote about social priming. He wrote, "The idea you should focus on, however, is that this belief is not an option. The results are not made up, nor are they statistical flukes. You have no choice but to accept that the major conclusions of social priming of these studies are true. More important, you must accept that these are true about you." So he was so taken by social priming studies to include a chapter in his following the Nobel Prize, Thinking Fast and Slow, bestseller up until today. The chapter is still there today. Social priming, you must believe it. What is the problem with these social priming studies? Most of them have very, very small samples. Most of them are very, very difficult to replicate. So he wrote this in 2011, it came out 2011. Already in 2012, he's getting a little bit worried because 2011 is the beginning of what we term the replication crisis. Suddenly we realize that some things do not make a lot of sense. Suddenly we publish all sorts of things in psychology journal like people can feel the future. Then we have this sense of false positive psychology that people are doing something called questionable research practices or p-hacking. They're trying to get the p-value lower than 0.05 in ways that now we call questionable, right? So he's seeing this, and to say, to be honest, Kahneman is really a really good researcher and very humble and willing to learn. So he writes an email to all of the social priming researchers and telling them, all of you, of course, know that questions have been raised about the robustness of priming results. Your field is now a poster child for doubts about the integrity of psychological research. People have now attached a question mark to the field. All I have personally at stake is that I recently wrote a book that emphasizes priming research as a new approach. Count me as a general believer. He still believes in social priming, but he's asking social priming people, please, I ask you, do some replications, check that everything is solid because the samples are very, very small. He is seeing a train wreck looming. And all the headlines, Nobel laureate challenges psychologists to clean up their act. This is really, really interesting because how do we know whether something is solid or not? We do replications. Did the social priming people do the replications? No. People across the psychological science came together, many labs from around the world in a big collaboration trying to do replications of social priming. And what is the result? Across all the different domains of social priming, we failed to find support. So here we have hostility priming, commitment priming, honesty priming, intelligence priming, death priming. We can't seem to replicate this. I'm sure that if you open your psychology books, all of this social priming is still in there. Elderly priming, all the stuff, the classics, thousands of citations. We can't seem to get this to work with a sample of thousands of people from around the world. Here is one example. This is one of the priming papers in 1979. This is Robert Wire who published this, and this is the first replication attempt. Replication attempt failed to find support for this. But back then, the first reaction to the failure to replicate this finding is that replicators don't know how to do replications. These Ivy League scholars, they know. If you let them do the same kind of studies, then they will be able to show you, because of their expertise, because of the way that they conduct studies, that things are very, very solid. So this is here Randy. He led this collaboration with all these people from around the world. So you can see a lot of people that I know very well. It's a really success story for how psychology came together in order to clean up their act. What happened when we ran another replication study? So you can see poor Randy again with another 11 authors did the whole thing once again in order to address some of the concerns, doing replications once by themselves and then once with consulting the social priming authors. What did they find? Both of them, despite our best efforts to produce favorable conditions for the effect to emerge, we did not detect a hostile priming effect, not in the close replication and not in the conceptual replication with the help of social priming. So social priming is a very sad story. And I teach this as a case study for how not to do certain things. Every year, there's another thesis student, undergraduate, master's, who reads all this literature and says, social priming is amazing, thousands of articles, thousands of citations, I want to do this. I'm saying we need to teach you about what's happening about social priming, because social priming is in big trouble now, and I wouldn't invest anything in trying to build on that. Why is this important? Because Daniel Kahneman, already above 80, goes to some blog posts. The blog post covers all of the findings regarding social priming and saying social priming doesn't work. Daniel Kahneman in that chapter was wrong. And here comes the amazing thing about Kahneman's admission regarding these results. What the blog gets absolutely right is that I placed too much faith in underpowered studies. There is a special irony in my mistake because the first paper that Amos Tversky and I published was about the belief in the law of small numbers, which allows researchers to trust the results of underpowered studies with unreasonably small samples. He is the one who in the 1970s went to statistician conferences and psychology conferences and told everybody, be very, very careful, small samples. However, he fell into the same trap. How ironic, right? So if the person who warned the world about this falls into the same trap, how are we going to avoid this trap? It's a very big trap. And all this comes from a single question. So this is a lot of interviews. I was wrong, at least in this case, largely discredited the famous replication crisis. So social priming is no longer relevant. This chapter that I wrote, please ignore that chapter. But what I really like is this statement over here. There were essentially no takers for my suggestion that priming researchers should proactively replicate each other's work. Who replicated this? Not the priming people. We did. The social science, the open science community. We're the ones who followed up on this. Why is this important? Because I still felt that Kahneman is biased. What is the bias that Daniel Kahneman wasn't seeing when he gave this interview? It's the I'm less biased than others bias. Others are biased. Others are not checking themselves. However, I am solid. I am good. I don't need to revisit my own research. So my question to Kahneman, or my question to behavioral economics, my question to judgment and decision making and everybody who built on Kahneman and Tversky, how do you know that you're solid? You told others you should clean up your act. Did you clean up your act? Did you try this? So back then, I was in my postdoc, 2016, 2017, and I asked, so behavioral economics and JDM, who is going to check that we're solid and we're doing this? So I decided I'm going to do this. We are. So I got together with a bunch of people and I decided that together with my students and together with everybody in my courses, I'm going to tackle to run replications of behavioral economics, judgment and decision-making classics in the literature by Kahneman and Tversky. So we formed a team. It's a team that you can join. We're open to anybody joining from anywhere in the world as early as you want. And you can see that everybody who went through my course, it's very, very small, but I'll tell you that there's like 390 course students. These are all my thesis students, 45 of them. And in addition, after we finish the course or the thesis, then I go on Twitter X or I go on Blue Sky or I go on LinkedIn and I say, my students did this work. We collected the data, we've done everything. Now we want to submit this to publication. Who wants to come and take the lead? And then these early career researchers from around the world. So Raluca from Romania here is the local representative that we have so far and who connected me to come to speak to you today. She is in our team and she reached out and she said, I really like this replication effort. Can we join? I said, absolutely. Choose which one you want to help and then let's bring this together to publication. And we were very successful in doing that so far. So we've been mapping all of the behavioral economics, all of the judgment decision-making, heuristics and biases, trying to revisit them, trying to understand what's working, what's not working, and then even trying to extend them to build extensions on top of the replications. So replications to revisit the classics, and then extensions in order to enhance the classics. And finally, this is what we ran. We ran 150 of those. So all of my courses and all of my thesis, we've done a lot of revisiting. All of Kahneman and Tversky's famous classics, including the belief in the law of small numbers. So we just went through the entire literature to look at the most impactful studies in order to try and see, can we get this to work or not? So you can see that there's lots of things that came out of that. And finally, in terms of publications, it's amazing, but work by undergraduates and master students is getting published in some of the best journals in social psychology. So you can see that our team has a Google Scholar. You can go and have a look at the Google Scholar. And now it's becoming like this exponential impact of we're getting a lot of things out there into the literature to try and show how solid, how robust, how good are the things from Kahneman and Tversky. And it's nice, it's a positive way of thinking. That I'm excited to say that most of the Kahneman and Tversky stuff and most of behavioral economics and most of judgment and decision making is doing well. It replicates a lot better than some of the other classics in social psychology. So I'll give you like a taste of some of the things that we replicated. You can see some of the headlines. So whenever we come out with something, then some of the media picks up on this. So I'm less biased than others bias, which we call the bias blind spot, which I think Kahneman had in that interview. So this is actually something that you can demonstrate. How do we demonstrate this? Once again, there's like single questions. So you ask people, for example, in my classroom, I ask people, please rate yourself relative to the average classmate. How dependable you are, how objective you are, how considerate you are of others, how much of a snob you are, how deceptive you are, how selfish you are. And you can see that generally the positive ones are higher than the negative ones. But if all of us think that together, then on average, it can't be that these are more positive and these are more negative, in terms of this being higher, the positive being higher and the negative being lower. So something has to give. So on average, we think that we're better than others. We think that we're less biased than others. So we do this as a first step. And then we tell people, self-serving tendency. Please rate yourself and the average classmate on this tendency. So you can see that people rate the average classmate to be more biased than they are, which is really, really ironic because they just saw and we just discussed that people are biased and they see themselves as better than average. So you can show with a single question to show others their bias in how they think that they're better than others. And this is a very classic effect in the literature. So the first one that we replicated, this is a team that I visited in Sweden. I gave a workshop over there and then we said, let's run a replication in 2 days. What is the simplest replication that we can run? We found an article, a very, very influential article with thousands of citations where people think that they're better drivers than everybody else. So on average, 85% of people think that they're better drivers than everybody else. So if you sample an entire population, so for example, I ask you, compared to other people in the classroom, how much of a good, are you better driver? And 85% think that they're better than. So if everybody thinks this together, something doesn't make sense. This is a bias. And you can get this with a single question, right? Compared to others, are you better, same, worse driver, right? So we've done this again and again. We've done this here, we've done this here, better than average effect. Another replication that I did with thesis students, and then an early career researcher who is an assistant professor in Geneva joined us. And then when these get published, then they're picked up by the news like Psychology Today over here. So this is in terms of behavioral economics and judgment and decision making. Before I proceed, any questions or things you want to ask about this part? Everything clear? Okay. Let's see how we're doing. Okay, not bad. All right. So now I'm going to move into a completely different domain. So all this was behavioral economics, judgment, decision making, how we perceive the world, our statistical intuitions, how we compare ourselves to others, these kinds of things. Now we're going to talk about something a lot more fundamental than that, about who we are deep inside, philosophical notions about the world. So I'm going to start with altruism. And this is a very famous vignette, a very famous thought experiment from the 1970s. How many of you have seen this before? One? Okay, two, three, okay. So let's read this together. You're walking in a suit to a job interview that you really want to get. And you're walking along and then you see this pond which is not deep for you, but it's deep for a child. And then you notice that there's a child that jumped into this pond and is about to drown. And now you have this dilemma. You're wearing an expensive, let's say $1,000 clothing suit. It will be ruined, cannot be cleaned again because this is very dirty. And you're gonna miss your interview. You're gonna be late for your interview. The question is, do you jump into the pond and save the child? So think about this for a second. And now if you don't mind sharing with me, how many of you think that you will go into the pond and save the child? Raise your hand. Many of you think that you would. Is there somebody who thinks that they wouldn't? Some? Okay. Very brave. Because usually people don't admit this. They find it very, very difficult first to think that and then to share that with others. And then we have a discussion when I present this to my students. Ask why. Why yes? Why not? So, simple question. Why do we even need to talk about these kinds of things? Why do we need to ask these stupid single questions? What can we learn about this from ourselves? But now you're thinking, we already went through an entire part where I give you questions that bias you in a certain direction. So what am I going to do this time? What kind of twist am I going to give you this time in order to change your opinion about something? So here is a girl who is drowning in front of us in poverty, but not the pond here, but in South America. She can really use your $1,000 in order to be saved right now. I can promise you, I can assure you, I can prove to you, I can confirm for you that your $1,000 is going to save this girl. We had an obligation, and most of us says we're gonna jump into the pond and we're gonna save this girl. The question is, right now, this girl in South America who needs our help, many of her in the world, many girls drowning in poverty, are we gonna step in and help? So for this girl, how many of us are willing to take out $1,000 right now and help this girl? Raise your hand. Now, this is very, very challenging. The first time that I heard this, I felt very bad with myself because this exposed some biases within me. And immediately, I had a very strong reaction in, no, but there's a reason for this. There's a justification. And we can come up with many different factors about what is the difference between the first one and the second one. So some things are the same. What is the same? You have a little girl and she is drowning and she needs our help. And we can save this girl if we wanted to, right? However, some things in the circumstances are different. What is different? She's far away. There's, I don't know if I can trust. Here, I'm saving the person by myself, so I know that this is happening. Over there, I'm sending money. I don't know if the money is going to go, maybe it's going to go to some corrupted people. Is it going to help her? I don't know. There's so many uncertainties. So there's a difference in uncertainty. There's a difference in responsibility. There's more people that might be able to help, but they're not helping. With a child in the pond, there's only me there. So we can map out with this very single question, very specific question, we can map out, wait, what are the psychological factors that differentiate between the first single question and the second single question, right? Where is this coming from? Perhaps you've heard of this person or this movement. So Peter Singer is the philosopher who influenced or inspired a movement called effective altruism that tries to do as much good as possible in the world. He's very influential within the academic circles. So you can see he is Google Scholar. He's doing quite well with, a lot of hundreds of publications regarding philosophy and morality. But he's also written public books that I really recommend because they get you to question a lot of things about yourself. Many times with thought experiments of a single question. Would you do this or not do this? And to me, this was very inspiring in order to change a lot of the things that I do in my research and a lot of the things that I do in my classes in order to concentrate more on trying to do more good and trying to do good better. Some things I like about effective altruism, some things I don't like about effective altruism, but at least I understand that something here is important. And there's something going on in my mind that I need to understand better, and there's something important going on in other people's mind that we need to understand. And I'll show you a little bit of what we're doing with this. So the question is, does it really matter that you don't have to walk around these children as you walk down the street? Is it important that they're not drowning next to you? This is what he writes in his book. 5.4 million children under 5 died in 2017, with a majority of these deaths being from preventable or treatable diseases, causes. Here is just one case described by the World Bank. Take the death of this small boy this morning, for example. The boy died of measles. We all know he could have been cured at the hospital, but the parents had no money, and so the boy died of a slow and painful death, not of measles, but out of poverty. And we all have things that we can do differently in terms of the way that we help others, how much we donate, the kind of money that we spend, is it going on things that are needed, how we're helping people around us. So I'm very curious about this psychology of altruism. And many times a single question is enough for us to tap into something very deep and fundamental. Okay? So psychologically, what is the difference between ruining a $1,000 suit or spending $1,000? Before I come back to this, and I'm going to finish up with an answer to this question regarding Peter Singer, I'm going to present to you something that you've already seen a million times before. And this is the trolley dilemma. Right? Trolley dilemma is a classic. We love to make fun of trolley dilemmas because we've all seen the nasty memes that try to put all kinds of ridiculous things on these two tracks. For those of us who have not heard of trolley dilemmas, what is a trolley dilemma? There is a train and it doesn't have any brakes. It's rushing down the track, and on the track, I don't know what they're doing there and why they're not moving, but they're there. There's 5 people. They're about to be killed by the train. However, lucky for them is that you are here with a lever, and you can pull the lever in order for the train to redirect into a track that has 1 person. Question for you, would you pull the lever in order to divert the train? If you do nothing, 5 will be killed. If you do something, pull the lever, 1 will be killed. So, deontologist versus utilitarian perspectives in philosophy and what needs to be done here. But generally, when you present this to people, what do most people say? How many of you would pull the lever? Most people around the world tend to say about 70–80%. Doesn't matter where you go in the world, it fluctuates a little bit, but generally the majority is that most people would pull the lever. What is the twist? We've seen from Peter Singer, so that you know there's a twist. What is the twist? What is the next iteration of the trolley dilemma? There's this. Instead of a lever, there's a bridge. And in order to stop the train from the bridge, you need to push a person from the bridge to land on the rail in order to stop the train. And the question is now, how many of you would push the person from the bridge in order to land on the rail and stop the train from hitting the 5 people? Yes? You would? You would? Okay, good. Some of you still would. Interesting. Then comes another question is, there are actually 2 people on this bridge. Why not throw yourself? Would you commit suicide to jump on the rail in order to stop the 5 people? People are like, oh, wait. Me? No. Pushing another person? No problem. So, a lot of very interesting things, and if we really want to, we can make this absurd. So 5 people versus the Mona Lisa. There's a really good website that does all the absurd trolley dilemma. So we've made fun of this again and again. You can go and play with this. We do this in the classroom a lot. And then people ask, and they've asked this for a very long time. They ask, these hypothetical scenarios, come on. People don't know how they're going to act when they're actually there. So I have a colleague friend from Ghent University in Belgium who has dedicated much of his career into trying to show or test whether hypothetical scenarios actually translate to real life behavior. The first paper he did a while back was about mice. So he gave people first hypothetical scenarios, saying, what would you do? A week later, invited them back and brought them into a room where there was a counter. And he said, 5 mice are going to die. They're going to be zapped if you do nothing. But if you push the button, then only one mouse. is going to die. Are you going to do this or not? And he was showing that actually there is some correlation between the hypothetical and the real life behavior, but not high. And then people push back on this and they say mice is not the same as people, and you can't deduce anything from that. So this year, he did this with people. So first I want to say, no mice were killed in the experiment. This was deception. To get that ethics approval was already very, very hard, but he got it, and he did this with mice, and then he got a pushback, and then that helped the other one to come out with real people. So no people were killed, but he did this in a convincing enough setup where with electric shock, nobody died, electric shocks. Would you push in order for one person to receive an electric shock instead of 5? So he got ethics approval. He did this with many people from all over the world, a big collaboration. You can see all the people here. And finally, this year, JPSP, one of our top journals in social psychology, is publishing. And what is the conclusion? Actually, results show that responses to traditional hypothetical dilemmas moderately predict real-life behavior. Moderately is already much better than does not predict. So actually, there's something meaningful about these hypothetical scenarios. Very interesting finding. I suggest a replication in Bucharest. Maybe you want to try and see if you can get an IRB for this. Who cares? Why do we care about this? Why does Dries want to do all these experiments? Why do we still do these trolley dilemmas? What is the number one thing that we should be thinking about where trolley dilemmas apply? Should have been already here as a reality, but it's still delayed. It's happening though. There's lots of things that are happening around the world. What is happening? Self-driving autonomous vehicles are coming, and they're going to make decisions for us. Who is going to make these decisions? Based on what? Who is going to program this? Is it going to be these developers in a dark room somewhere in Silicon Valley who's going to decide for you in Bucharest what this self-driving autonomous vehicle is going to do? Or is it going to be you? So maybe we need to get your moral intuitions. Maybe we need to have a public vote. We need to fill an entire stadium with a lot of people and then show trolley dilemmas and say, what would you here? People would vote. What do you do there? People would vote. And then we decide in Bucharest, this is what the self-driving autonomous vehicle would do. Maybe. But this is coming and we need to prepare for this. And trolley dilemmas that we thought were hypothetical suddenly become a reality because somebody needs to program these cars. Right? So, moral machines, this is the number one biggest experiment in social psychology ever. We're talking about tens of millions of participants. So some people in MIT decided if we do one trolley dilemma here and one trolley dilemma there, we're never going to get an understanding of what's happening in people's minds. How to address this? We're going to build a platform, moral machines. You can go and participate. Not only can you participate on the scenarios that they have, you can design your own scenarios, and this is what made this viral. So you can decide, who are these 5? 5 cats versus 1 dog. You can decide what kind of a person this is, elderly, young, a woman, pregnant. You can decide what a robot, AI, you can decide whatever you want, and you can also decide the conditions. Is the person who's crossing the street doing this against the law? Maybe there's a traffic light, right? So go in there, design your own, and get to see, you can send this to your friends and get them to participate. So now we have millions of people answering tens of thousands of scenarios. So now there's no need for us to do any trolley dilemma experiments anymore. We have the moral machines and it's still running. It's an amazing platform. And I really invite you to think, I'm thinking about this all the time, how can we change the experiments that we do here with data collection, 100 people, 200 people, to a platform where everybody can play with our experiment to design something a little bit different and then invite millions of people to participate in this. And once you have millions of people, you can really get an understanding of people's psyche. So here, for example, you can see the moral compass. They've identified 3 clusters of what people care about, 3 places, 3, let's say, groups of people around the world who care about different things. The Western countries, the Eastern countries, and the Southern countries. And they care about slightly different things. So for example, the Western countries have a preference for inaction, and they have a preference for sparing more, but then it seems like some of them, like the Eastern ones, are more, sparing the lawful, sparing pedestrians. So you can see all the kinds of different things that they mapped out. And some of this is a little bit peculiar. Some of this doesn't make a lot of sense. Some of this does. But for example, one of the biases, especially in countries that hail from French colonies, sparing more females, sparing the fit, sparing the higher status. I don't understand what that's about. Sparing the lawful, sparing the young, sparing more characters, and so forth. Here is really an astonishing kind of mapping of what people tend to save over others. So for example, you've got cat, criminal, dog. So criminal is between cat and dog, so people don't save those. Stroller, girl, boy, pregnant, male doctors. So if you're studying medicine, you're gonna be saved by the self-driving autonomous vehicle. Executives are here. I don't know why large women and large men are, lots of things here don't make any sense, but this is our psyche. This is our collaborative, the way that we've answered millions of people from around the world in moral machines. I find this to be inspiring. Lots of things to do with this. All this hails from a single question. Trolley dilemma. You do A or you do B. You can play with this with many, many different ways. Okay? Finally, and with this I'm going to conclude, this is what I've been doing with my students in the last 2-3 years, and now we're turning this into a platform that is going to be very similar to moral machines. So hopefully you can join, you can use this, maybe you can translate this to Romanian and run this in Bucharest. Lots of opportunities for you to collaborate with us. Here's an example. And I'm trying to understand the way that people think about philanthropy, the way that people think about donating to charities. So imagine a scenario where you have two charities and they're exactly the same in every way. So for example, here, both of them can prevent 5 deaths for $1,000 of donation, right? So it seems like here your suit is going to save more than one, it's going to save 5. So it doesn't matter which one. And now I'm asking you, how would you allocate $10,000 between these two charities? So if you don't care which charity, what would you do? 50-50, right? So here you can allocate 50-50. But if you like A more, you can allocate more to A. And if you like B, you can allocate more to B. Now comes the tricky part. And this is where we play with a single question. Here the only difference between these two charities is how much they use the funding for marketing. So both of them, you give $1,000, you've saved 5 people. So effectiveness is actually the same. But A spends 200, so charity A spends 200, 20%, and charity B spends 100 out of the 1,000 on marketing. So if people don't care about marketing, they would say 50-50, right? How do people answer this? How would you answer this? It seems like people have an aversion to their money going to things like marketing, right? Here is how people answered this kind of scenario. So it's a very simple scenario. You have a choice between two, and you can allocate this on a scale. And you can see that the mean is over here. The mean is something like 75. 50-50 is over here. You can see that a lot of people said 100% to the one that has less advertising. So charity B. Charity B over here. Does this make sense to you? What have we learned about people? We learned something very important about people. People don't like their money going to marketing. What can you do as a charity? We'll come back to this. Is this effective or ineffective? It's a very good question, but say for example you reframe this to charity A requires 800. So let's say it's second year. And they finished the marketing, no need for marketing anymore. Actually, if you take down the marketing and you think about this in terms of effectiveness, actually charity A only requires $800 in order to save these 5 people, right? Because what does marketing do? It doesn't do anything. So suddenly people are like, oh, if you reframe it this way, then we understand maybe actually we prefer charity A. So sometimes people have a gut intuition because we care so much about aversion to marketing. We don't stop and think, okay, wait, let's take out the marketing, this one factor. What actually happens with effectiveness after we take out the marketing? Actually, we see that charity A requires less money in order to save the same number of people. Make sense? So here we might also have a bias. So I'm very interested in mapping out these biases in how we think about charity. Here's another one, overhead. Exactly the same scenario, but I changed marketing to overhead. It seems like people, when they think about overhead, overhead is basically managerial bureaucracy. How much do you need this to be managed? People don't like their money going to managers. They like their money going to the people who are in need. But sometimes we need managers, we need overhead, right? So it seems like over here, once again, we can see this aversion. They don't like to spend money on these kinds of things, overhead and marketing. So the question is, what can we do with this? Okay, so we understood something about human psyche, we understand the way that people process things, but can we do something about this? So single questions like this can really inform you in order to lead to field experiments and lead to interventions that might make a real difference. What can you do? You can ask somebody external to fund the marketing or the overhead. So let's say, for example, there's like Bill and Melinda Gates, or you have Warren Buffett, and they really care about boosting other people, and you tell them, you know, I realize people don't like marketing and overhead. Would you pay for marketing and overhead so that other people would donate more? And if they're rational and they understand and you show them the statistics, they might. It turns out that when we ask people, about 30% of people like to be boosters. They say, yeah, we'll take care of the overhead if that means that other people will donate more. So suddenly, as a charity, here's a way out for you. So we present more than that. So we present, another donor covers corresponding administrative costs. And then we really see that people tend to donate more and people tend to allocate more money to places where the overhead and the marketing is covered by other donors. Do we know that this replicates? Do we know that this extends? So yes, here we have Mixed Signals by Uri Genizzi, a science paper. Doesn't happen a lot that behavioral economics and psychology get published in science, but they did. So Genizzi and his wife and another collaborator ran the field experiment. First, they asked people in terms of hypothetical scenarios, then they ran a field study. And what you can see from the field study is that control condition, people donate about 7,500. Seed match, other interventions, overhead free, 2.5 times boost to people's donation. Unbelievable. This is real data from a real field experiment. So it seems like an insight that we got from a very simple experiment contrasting charity A versus charity B can lead to important insights in the field and can maybe inform people who do charities, who do philanthropy, in order to increase donations. So you can see over here, not only has this been done and published in Science, but they also did a replication, which is very important. So now we also know that this finding replicates. So I saw all of this, I ran some of this, and then I thought, too slow, too little, what can we do? And then I decided, instead of me coming up with all these factors and doing them one by one, I'm going to get all of you, all of my students, to participate. Just like with moral machines that you can decide what kind of scenarios you do, I go to my students and say, you are now in charge. Use this paradigm, charity A versus charity B, but you tell me what the factor is. Let's crowdsource, mass collaborate, all of us together, and then I'm going to use my funding in order to run data collection for all your hypotheses. So we've been running this for three years now, and you can see this is 2023, 2024, 2025, and we rank them in terms of the effect size, which are the most impactful factors. And what's interesting here, I don't know if you're familiar with Cohen's d, but Cohen's d, a typical Cohen's d, if you remember from contrasting candidate A and candidate B, a typical effect size is a Cohen's d is 0.5, right? This is kind of like what's to be expected in the literature. Usually it's even lower than that, 0.35. What are the factors that you have here? A Cohen's d of 2.24, 1.71, 1.51. So I run this as a competition between my students. Who is going to get the biggest factor? And then you can see they can get to factors that people really care about. So they care about risk aversion, they care about reputation, they care about personal experience, they care about whether they're advertisements or not, They care about whether you're a member of this charity or not a member. So things that seem intuitive, but now we have a mapping of how they compare to one another. A little bit like moral machines, but on a smaller scale with this charity A, charity B. Right. We also run all kinds of meta-analysis. So this is, for example, omission bias. I won't go into this, but then we construct all kinds of scenarios from that. The next step, and what we're going to do right now, I don't know if you're familiar with vibe coding, AI tools, but now AI tools do an amazing job in order to get you to program very sophisticated things with not knowing any code. So I vibe coded when I was in Budapest together with the Budapest people, a platform where we're going to do all these scenarios, and then you can come and suggest your own vignettes and suggest your own factor, and we're going to launch it at some point in the future. If you want to collaborate on this, I would be very happy to. But generally what we're hoping for, aiming for, we're not going to have tens of millions, but many people from around the world identifying as many factors as possible. So if you understand single questions, if you understand that psychology of single questions is important, if I've convinced you that you can do remarkable things with only a single scenario, and this is interesting for you, then you can join us. So whatever the domain is, behavioral economics, judgment and decision making, altruism, we took this all the way to every domain in life, happiness. All these things, you can design one single question that from that, you would infer all kinds of conclusions in order to help you with affecting people's lives in the real world. Okay? So this was very fast on a lot of topics, but hopefully I got you curious about this. If there's anything about what I talked about today that you feel is interesting, you want to talk more, then please email me. Everything is on my website. I'm also very active on Blue Sky and Twitter. We have a mailing list. All of the stuff that I do is on YouTube. If you're a student and you're thinking I shouldn't email a professor, please don't think that way. I'm very happy to hear from you. I try to answer everybody. Even if I'm busy, I might connect you with somebody else in the team, but I do answer, and it's very important for us to engage with early career researchers, with students, to get as many people excited about this and the stuff that we do. So I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Now, if there are any questions, I'm happy to pass the mic.
That was a lot, huh? I know.
So about the moral machine experiment, are the questions anonymized, or is the anonymity of the responder kept?
Yeah, so they don't require you to log in if you don't want to. In our platform, we're going to give you the opportunity to come in log in order for you to have a profile and get some feedback and to be able to compare yourself to others. I don't remember exactly what they've implemented in Moral Machines, but either way works. Definitely when they share the research insights and the data, everything is anonymized and de-identified.
Okay, because I was thinking about the way that the answers may vary if the identity is known. And if you are anonymous, maybe you can be more or less honest or not, I don't know.
Very interesting. This is like an interesting...
A single question.
Yeah, a single question. We can look at whether people are anonymous or identified and then see if they answer this differently. I can just say, it's actually interesting. When we did charity A versus charity B, one of the first, so the replication that we published eventually, one of the extensions that we added was anonymity. So we predicted that people really want their names associated with their donations. So we said they're exactly the same in every way, but charity A publishes the names of the donors on the website with the amount, and charity B is anonymous. And we hypothesized that people would like to have their names because when we walk around in the streets or the schools, the building is on this person. To our great surprise, People prefer anonymity. They don't want their donations to be associated with them publicly, which is really interesting. So that went counter to. So anonymity definitely plays an interesting role in all kinds of different directions, but we can test this first with intuitions, hypothetical, and then we can also manipulate this and see what happens. Very good.
Hello, congratulations for your speech and for the topic. That was really interesting. I was thinking at an example with the American and the death causes. So you're right, that's true. But wouldn't that be good to put a disclaimer saying that I personally work in the health and industry, and I've been reading a lot of research about causes, diabetes, health, and stuff like that. So I had responded that I know about that's the biggest cause of that in America. It's because of the food and the health and poor stuff. So where am I standing in the statistics? Because
you're doing better than all the people in the world and better than monkeys, right? So you're better informed about this domain. So there's a domain that you've dedicated time and resources in order to know more about, and you've succeeded in beating the bias, which is great, which means that there's hope for us. So if we look at a different domain that maybe you're not as well informed about, it at least gives you the optimism that perhaps with time, if you dedicate your time and resources in order to understand that domain, if you go to Gapminder, if you talk to other people who are knowledgeable about this and can tell you about what's happening in that field, then you will also overcome the bias in that other domain. So all of us are, we've developed intuitions and expertise in all sorts of different domains, but then some other things were completely biased. Sometimes I have to say, even if we know the facts, sometimes the fact that we know things causes us to not only debias, but bias in the other direction. So sometimes we overemphasize how much diabetes is. So we need to be very, very careful on how we do this calibration. I think the most important thing is to be accurate, to make sure that you're not biased in this direction and not this direction. And the way to do this is always test your intuitions, test your knowledge, make sure that you're not underestimating or overestimating. You don't have overconfidence or underconfidence, that you know exactly what it is that needs to be known, and you're well calibrated so that you know what's happening in the world, what's happening in your domain, and then you can make informed decisions. Sometimes even if you're informed, perhaps you've had this difficulty, it's very difficult to explain this to policymakers that have 5 minutes to give you in a discussion, 2 hours about many other topics, and you need to come with your expertise and debias them, knowing that they come with these biases, but you have knowledge that they don't, how to get them to move away from their bias. Sometimes presenting a question like this, a single question, can really help you deliver the message that, guys, you actually don't know, because compared to monkeys, you're doing worse than them. So Hans Rosling has been very, very successful and influential in getting the policymakers in Scandinavia, in Sweden, in the EU, to consider real facts rather than gut intuitions.
Thank you.
Mine doesn't work anymore.
Actually, I can just ask you.
Sure.
Did you ever discover a personal bias in your work and like a blind spot that you had? And if so, can you tell us what you did?
You mean my biases about the things that
Yeah, if you
my
had
own.
a blind spot that you didn't know about and then you discovered that you had.
Oh my gosh, all the time, every day. It's difficult to focus on one. But one of the reasons, even though I understand the impact of what it means for me to fly around the world, the environmental sustainability impact, I feel like this is a very important thing. First, the impact of me talking to you, and then maybe you talk to others, or maybe you do something afterwards, that lingers. But one of the reasons why it's important for me to go around and talk to different people in different culture, in different universities, is to try and debias myself. For example, I had the very colonialist mindset that I will go to Kenya for a month, I will be able to understand everything there, and then I will be able to contribute when I go back to Austria. Within the first few days, I realized that I have no chance at doing this, and just me being white in that kind of environment is already creating a lot of challenges, that I don't know anything about the things that they're sharing with me. And even when they share this kind of thing with me, I have a very limited scope based on my own limited understanding from growing up in a developed Western country, right? So this is the easiest way to think about kind of bias. Sometimes, we come into the global South and we say, we know what you need. We're going to implement this intervention. We're going to change your life and save you all from your drowning in the poverty pond, right? But then we realize that some of our interventions, not only do they not help, but they make things a lot worse. Sometimes I was walking over there in a slum, and the person who was showing me around was saying, the only thing that we wish is for all these foreigners and Westerners to get away from here because they're just making things a lot more difficult for us. Every day, every time, when I travel around the world, when I talk to people from other cultures, do I realize my bias. I am white, I am male, I'm very privileged, I've never had to struggle for anything in my life. This is already a source of bias. But whenever I think about things, all of my experiences in my life have led me to see things in a certain way that I do. Kahneman has a very interesting bias that he thinks is among the strongest. It's called the focusing illusion. Focusing illusion is that whatever it is that you're focused on right now dominates everything else that you do. For example, if I ask you, how do you compare your life to people who are in Spain? The first thing that people think about usually is the weather. It's like, oh, Spain is a lot warmer. Oh, do I wish that in Spain things... No. So they did originally this kind of experiment when they looked at the Midwest versus California. So both of them are in the United States. When you ask this kind of contrast and people think about the weather immediately, this dominates everything about their decision. Like, oh, California must be happier than living in the Midwest. However, when you map out the things, the factors that people really care about, access to education, the transportation, what is this culture around, so many factors, actually the weather is somewhere down there at the end, right? Focusing illusion is that when I ask you a question about something or when I think about something, it dominates everything else. So it's almost impossible for us not to be biased. And once you understand these kinds of things, then you understand that your bias is in everything. So in order to protect yourself, you need to come up with all sorts of mechanisms in order to make sure that you cannot completely eliminate the bias. But if you include other people that give you feedback, if you include a lot of people from all over the world, if you have checks and balances, if you put down your predictions in advance and you say, if the stock market drops by 5%, then I will quit, not based on my gut intuition on what the news is telling me. So we come out with a lot of simple habits, interventions in order to help people protect themselves from bias. It's not 100%, but once you see bias, you cannot unsee it. It's in everything that I do. It's a very humbling experience because then you don't come and you say, I'm the big expert, I'm going to tell you how to do things. I'm going to say, let's have a discussion, let's collaborate on this, let's see how you think about this. Then we can map things out in terms of, what can benefit humanity, what can benefit you, what can benefit me. This is kind of the way that I think about this. Thank you.
Well, I have a question. So, a very short one. What are the key aspects that you are paying special attention to when you conduct the replications? Like, how can replications go wrong? How do you know you've done a good replication or not so good?
Yeah, this is such a good question. Actually, maybe I'll use the mic just to make sure everybody can hear me. Okay, so this is a very good question. When we think of replications, how do we know that we've done a good replication? So we've already seen sample size is probably important. So we want to run a replication that has a large enough sample that we can infer something statistically. However, how do we know that we followed the original in the right way? So before I answer that, a good question to ask is, how do we know what happened in the original study? And the big problem is since I was an undergraduate. The first time I read an article, I'm like, what is this? The methods actually don't say very much about what happened in the experiment. Oh, we did this, we did that, and then they skipped all the important parts, and they get to then. And my question is, how do we know what happened there? So replications are very, very tricky because many of the original studies don't report everything very transparently. I'm not even talking about all the issues about maybe they ran a lot of pretests and pilots, and maybe they ran a lot of experiments that they did not include in the paper that we know nothing about. So already, the information available in the original studies and what is published is very, very problematic. Sometimes we have to do detective work. We need to go and look into archives. We need to contact the original authors that usually don't respond, sometimes respond with hostility. We need to do a lot of things in order to try and build some kind of a solid replication. Sometimes we need to make assumptions. So in transparency, in open science, every time we hit a roadblock, we don't know what happened here. Okay, we're gonna make assumptions. We're gonna assume that this is what they did, but it could be that this is wrong. It could be that we completely got this incorrectly. And for example, in social priming, we saw the first one and the second one. After they did the first replications, people were saying, you did this wrong. Did what wrong? Tell us how to fix this. And when they finally tell them what they think they should do in order to fix this, this didn't help. It made it even worse. So very, very tricky to do replications. Now, I have to say, I'm very, very cautious. So because I knew this, one of the reasons why I focused on behavioral economics and judgment and decision making and Kahneman and Tversky is because they did a very, very good job at writing all the scenarios. So I didn't have to guess, what is the scenario? What is the scale? Everything is available. Actually, I think one of the reasons why the science paper or all the Kahneman and Tversky work finally received the Nobel Prize and was very impactful is because they detailed everything very, very comprehensively in their papers, which made it more easy for me to come and build on this, made it easier for others to come and build on this. In addition, I chose to do replications on things that I could sense, have the intuition based on my experience, have a higher chances of working. So for example, this Kahneman and Tversky, I ran this in many places in the world. I ran this in the US, in Taiwan, Hong Kong, Israel, Netherlands, all the places where I worked and lived. And consistently, with very small samples, 40 students in a classroom, I can get these to work. So I thought, okay, so if I can get this to work in a classroom, maybe if I run this in a decent sample, a representative sample, then it would work. How to know whether you've done a successful replication? We don't know, and this is a really big problem because we don't publish replications. If we were honest and we did good science, then anybody who ever followed up on Kahneman and Tversky would share things publicly. Then we would meta-analyze everything, we would pull everything together, and we would see what worked, what didn't work, this country, that country. However, in our current literature, we have a strong publication bias. Publication bias is a big problem and it's a killer. Because, for example, when we had COVID, let's say, for example, I have 100 trials for a vaccination against COVID, right? Only 5 of them worked. Why 5? Because p-value 0.05. 5 out of 100 work. Let's say that I write all these things up and send this to a journal. Different journals. Each one goes to a different journal. What will the journal say? Journals say, oh, 5 found something amazing. You have a vaccination for COVID. Let's publish this. 95 are like, you didn't find something, so why would we publish this? We don't care about things that don't work. So we have obsession, fascination with novelty, and we have an obsession, fascination with things that work. P-value lower than 0.05. But because we don't see all the things that don't work, we don't know whether the things that we see in the literature that work are just a fluke or whether they really represent a real effect. So one of the things that we advocate for is to publish a lot more replications. After a while, people learn this, so they know that when they submit a failed replication or they submit a failed vaccination trial, then it's going to get rejected, so they don't even write this up. They put this in their file drawer. So it's never even been submitted. This is a strong publication bias. And now we have ways in a meta-analysis to estimate publication bias. We call people to share what it is that they have. We hope that people will share more and more. There will be more replications and there will be more null findings in the literature. But only when we publish everything, we provide all the materials, the data, and the code, and we make sure that the journals publish the things that work and the things that don't work, including novelty and replication. Only then do we have a solid science that we can really inform us and we can build on. So we advocate for all of that. We advocate for changing the publication landscape. There's so many things that we feel are going wrong. And in order for us to be able to see whether replication works or doesn't work, if it's a successful, good one, not good one, rigorous, not rigorous, we need to see everything that happened before it. Now we do best effort. We do whatever it is that we can. At least with judgment and decision making, it seems like our replication rate is about 70%, which is higher than the typical social psychology 30 to 50%. So it seems like at least with these vignettes, things are going well. But once we boost things up, once we do open sharing, once we do pre-registrations, once we accept things that are not novel or not p-value lower than 0.05, then the chances of rigor, quality, of good science increase by a lot. So hopefully, 10 years, some of the students here will become faculty or industry or whatever it is, will have a better informed science about what it is that they need to know about. But right now, when I look at the literature, when I open a social psychology book, it's like half of it, I don't know what this stands for. Is it solid, not solid? Some of the most impactful things from TED Talks and from all the things that we read in New York Times bestsellers, I already know do not replicate. Does anybody go and update the TED Talks? Does anybody go and update Thinking Fast and Slow to change the chapter over there? Of course we don't. So the new students that come in, the new practitioners that come in, they still build on wrong information. Not to mention that we have a whole issue with misinformation in addition to this. But this is just to say that we have a lot of challenges. At least we need to make sure that the way that we do science is solid. And the way to do this in one word is transparency. Open and share as much as possible.